the main purpose of the whole year, or at least one of my like major projects, was to get vertical care, integrated. So it would be triage. And if you were a walkie-talkie, if you were standing, you would go to vertical care for rapid treatment, rapid triage, get them in, get them seen, get them out. And that way we could free up the bed. So we had to find the space in the emergency department where those patients could go, really advocate for staffing to staff that area if we were really going to make it work.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
On this week's episode of Power Supply, we are going to be speaking with Lea Scopelliti, Director of Strategic Sourcing and Corporate Purchasing at the Guthrie Clinic, and we're going to be talking about her path into supply chain. She was recently recognized by Becker's. We'll have her tell us a little bit about that. And she's going to talk about how important relationship building was to her early in her career so that she could have an impact on her community's healthcare system.
Yeah, Justin, really interested to see as a young emerging leader, just really what her takeaways are. We always need to be reminded of how important those relationships are and sharing some of those experiences and best practices. So really looking forward to seeing what Lea has to say today.
All right, we're going to be right back with Lea after a short break. Stay with us.
Boom! I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Power Supply.
Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Lea Scopelliti, Director of Strategic Sourcing and Corporate Purchasing at the Guthrie Clinic. And Lea, we're really excited to have you on the show today to talk about rebuilding a supply chain through relationships. And I have to tell you, I think everybody knows inherently that this is really critical, not only to supply chain, but pretty much every aspect of business in so many ways. But it's become more and more important with the stress that supply chain is under and the consequences to many of the clinicians, right? Because they've had some major supply chain disruption. They didn't necessarily understand why, but it's impacted their day to day, and having those strong relationships allows teams to work better together. So you've got a unique story you're going to tell us, and I'm sure we're going to go through lots of different topics as you tell your story. I want to thank you for coming on the show, and welcome to Power Supply.
Thank you very much.
I'm excited, by the way. Let me just jump right in because you have recently been acknowledged as one of the top 40 under 40 emergent supply chain leaders. Is that correct?
Yep, that's right.
That's pretty awesome. Congratulations on that. Well, that's from Becker's, I do believe.
Yes, yep. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes.
Yeah, Gary, you could almost, be there twice now at your age.
I knew that was coming.
So wrong. That's a setup right there all day long. Thank you, Hayes. Thanks twice.
Of course, you were eligible a couple 40 years ago, but anyway. We're glad to have you, and again, congratulations. That's
awesome.
That's fantastic.
Thank you.
So, Lea, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? How did you, find your way to supply chain, and then, find yourself, being acknowledged with such a nice award, for your contributions and commitment to supply chain?
Well, yeah, it's definitely an interesting path into healthcare supply chain. I'm from Sayre, and that is where the main campus of the Guthrie Clinic is in Sayre, PA, Robert Packer Hospital. And it's, you know, pretty much the only employer in the area, one of the only. So your parents work there, your friends' parents, everybody kind of works for Guthrie. And I started at the Guthrie in junior high. I was a volunteer. I was a candy striper in the 7th grade. And I started at the Guthrie when it was only Robert Packer at the time. I might have to fact check that. I think it was only Robert Packer in all of the Guthrie clinics. So we've got over 100 clinics now and 6 hospitals. And I've really worked at Guthrie pretty much on and off every year since. So really have gotten to see it grow and have certainly grown my roles throughout the whole process. So I was a volunteer, and then I went to the University of Scranton for my undergrad. And of course I thought I wanted to be a doctor like my dad, but I really definitely just wanted to have too much fun in college, and that didn't work. It didn't work out, but you know, healthcare people, we still kind of have that calling and know we want to be in healthcare. So I finished in finance and had a moment of, you know, rebellion. I feel like I was like, you know what? I don't think I want to end up in healthcare like everybody in SARE, or go back to SARE, you know, do what everybody else does in, you know, in my family or in town. And I wanted to go to the private sector. Actually, I really wanted to do sales analysis or forecasting. That's, you know, really what I love is the data and making decisions from data, no matter what it was. And I thought, I love clothes and I love fashion, and I thought that would be cool. So I had an internship with Guthrie a little bit in college. So I did 2 summers in internal audit and compliance. Not a lot of fun. Got some cool experience. I got to dig through trash for HIPAA violations. And I think maybe that was where I decided maybe I don't want to do this.
You got to tell me how tedious that was. I mean, you're digging for HIPAA violations.
Yeah, it was crazy.
I gotta say,
stuff. This is like FBI stuff. This is great.
That may have been the moment I was like, you know what? Maybe this isn't where I want to go, is digging through trash. But no, we had a really, really great compliance officer, and he's still with Guthrie, and his office is right down the hall from mine now, and we still laugh about it. But he would take me on, you know, compliance walkthroughs, and he would say, okay, just look at those couple pieces of paper on top of the trash there, make sure they don't have patient information in them. And then we'd go to the next trash can and the next trash can.
How much did you find? That's what I'm curious about.
Honestly,
you gotta be careful. You don't want to throw anybody in the gutter.
We're going back a little ways, Hayes. You know, yes. 7-year rule.
No, and they were, you know, Guthrie's great about like handling any sort of breaches like that. I mean, but I don't think I ever really found anything incriminating. It never had like anything super identifying on it.
For our listeners, we're actually on essentially like a Zoom call. Could you work with Gary on his clothing and maybe give him an audit? Because you said you had some fashion experience.
No comment. I don't know.
Yeah, thank you.
He's going casual. I get it. So am I. It's warm. It's super warm out.
Hayes, I wasn't even going to bring up the comment of going through your trash, but I'm about to. Okay, we're going to leave it alone.
It's funny,
he loves fashion, and so I was just looking at you here, and I thought, man, you could use some help. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But it's. That was definitely the
moment. Where do you go from here? Let's keep going.
It was after those internships, I was like, oh man, like, I don't know, this is where my experience is now as an internal audit. Like, I got to do some kind of quick swerve to not kind of do that. It was, it was really great. And again, I built some really great relationships and, through the internship, had some really great exposure. Guthrie does a really great job with their internships and their fellowship. And I had always worked at retail in college too. Make money. I worked for Ann Taylor Loft. I was a sales associate, we were called. I did that all through undergrad and through grad school, and I found an internship with corporate Ann Taylor in New York City. I actually got the internship from a great relationship at undergrad. I was helping people with homework. I was one of a couple girls in the finance department, and we always seemed to be the ones who got asked for help or for our homework, assistance anywhere. So there was one young man who sat next to me, and I always helped him out. I always worked through his homework with him. And then after I'd applied for the internship, he like ran up to me in the library one day and he was like, "Did you just apply for an internship with Ann Taylor?" And I was like, yes, like just, literally like a couple hours ago. And he was like, "My aunt is the recruiter." He's like, "Don't worry." He's like, "You are in." He's like, "You've helped me out so much." He's like, "I said such great things about you." That's like basically how I got the in. She was like the main recruiter for the position in New York.
Kidding.
I know it was crazy. And the fact that I had the store experience was also really helpful. They loved that I had worked in the stores for so long and really knew the product and how the operations of, the front line worked. And it was a really, really great summer. It was. I learned a lot. I lived in New York City. It was kind of like, wow, I did that. That's exactly what I said I wanted to do. The internship was in planning and allocation. So we looked at trends for what was selling. I got to see, how the data really affected decisions at, such a corporate level like that. And I was actually the one who was sending product to stores. And it was kind of obvious type of thinking, but it was, super interesting. Obviously you're going to send twice as many shorts to the stores in Florida than you are in Boston. And I learned how to use SAP there, which, came in handy down the line when I, went back into supply chain. But I loved living in the city. I had a lot of fun. I met a lot of great people, but I'm a country girl. I'm live in rural PA and I love my car. I love being able to just drive to the grocery store and not have to take the subway. I didn't like all the people. I kind of missed the deer and the birds. So this was, prior to remote work being, so I was like, well, I can't do this. I don't want to live in New York City.
Lea, I love your background. I love hearing where you came from to get where you're at now, because I think that this is probably a whole nother podcast we could get into, is how we recruit others outside of the healthcare industry to bring that knowledge of what you learned into it. So I know a lot of times, we'd go after certain manufacturing operations people within supply chain to come over into healthcare and use their knowledge. I think it's a really key component of when we're recruiting into that supply chain world, is not just being in our own bailiwick, but outside of that to bring fresh new ideas in. So I love hearing your background, Lea.
Yeah, thank you. So long story short, I was like, I gotta get back into healthcare. It really, it wasn't as impactful. I really was like, yeah, this is cool and it's fun and the perks were great. I got a lot of free clothes, a lot of good discounts, but it just really wasn't impactful like it is working in healthcare. It's just not patients, it's not my community. It didn't really matter. It was like shoes. So I didn't really feel I could do that forever. And then I kind of immediately tried to get back into healthcare. And as I was applying to grad schools, trying to think about what I was going to do, I got a job working the front desk back at Guthrie. That's the old standby. I can always work at Guthrie. I worked the front desk, and then I was a clinical assistant for a dermatologist for a year. I did his ordering. I knew the products. I got a little toe into the water back again in healthcare supply chain.
I was going to say, there's a lot of little transferable skills and things that you were doing in all these different roles that gave you an appreciation for supply chain. But how do you wind up in supply chain? So you're back home, you're bouncing around a little bit with different roles throughout Guthrie, but, you haven't found your home yet, your career. How did you land in supply chain? How did you arrive there?
So from my master's program, I was required to do an administrative fellowship, and I applied all over. Like, you have to do a lot of applying to fellowships, administrative fellowships. Interviewed around a couple of places, and I kind of told myself, like, no, I have to try something other than Guthrie. I have no experience outside of this health system. I want to try and stretch myself or go outside my comfort zone, see how I can kind of fare where it's not my parents or my friends' parents, everyone I work with. But ultimately, my family, there were some health issues. So I landed, and it was March 2020. So it was definitely a good thing that I ended up going with the Guthrie Fellowship. We got back into the fellowship, and Guthrie has a 2-year program, which was something that I wanted. The first year, you get 4 quarterly rotational fellowships. And then the second year, you get a year-long project where you may manage a department for a year or have some kind of like longer term project. And in my quarterly rotations, I had done a lot with like RFPs and vendor related projects. So we worked on an AI tool for sepsis with Walters Kluwer, and I was kind of the project manager there. I was the point person between the vendor and the clinical teams at Guthrie to try and stand the tool up and do pilot programs and work through the bugs. And then my next project, Guthrie opened an early learning center, a daycare for employees' kids to have first dibs on, and they had to set up essentially all of the third-party tools for billing and the management of signing students up. So again, I was the point person, the project manager between the vendor and Guthrie. I had to do my clinical rotation, so I was in the emergency rooms for 6 months. I was doing throughput projects and essentially, interim managing, and that ended up being my year-long project was at the Cortland Emergency Department, which at the time really was between managers. It was, 2021. So the department was they really needed a manager. They really needed some help. They needed someone basically just to be there, to escalate problems, to take care of whatever they needed, to be a voice really for the department and kind of rebuild them. They had a lot of travelers in and out. They had a ton of staff turnover. The emergency room and the patients were, just getting more difficult. So the team had a lot of mending to do. They were not even storming yet. So I think it was, a really big challenge in me. And was a huge challenge, I think, was pulling that department together and being that leader for them and bringing everybody together and uplifting the department and recognizing them throughout the organization. And I had a lot of connections through the fellowship, through my dad, my uncle worked at Guthrie. There were physicians at Guthrie. I don't want to be like, people know my name. They know I'm in the fellowship. So we have a lot of ties to upper levels. So I was able to be a voice for the department for different areas, introduce them to people, get things that they really didn't know who to go to for what. They were the newest hospital to the Guthrie system. That was one, I think, my preceptor or the head of the fellowship program is the VP of talent. And that's, her job is really to look at talent in the organization and place them, which I think is really smart how Guthrie does it. But I think she really saw from that I'm not really scared. I don't scare easy. I know that I want to do what's best for Guthrie and for the communities, and I'll go right into the emergency department and let's do it.
Let me just jump in there and ask a question about that. So you jump in, you're doing the fellowship, you go get assigned to this ED. What was your first couple of weeks like? I mean, did you feel like you had a pretty good handle on what it should look like, or was it just a lot of learning that you're like, okay, talking to people in there and finding out what the true issues were?
So I knew what a really high functioning emergency department could look like. I spent 6 months at Corning Hospital, it's our smallest hospital. It's a brand new building. It's gorgeous. They have really great leadership in place there. So I spent a lot of time there and I knew all of the lean tools that we use, the scorecards, the performance board, the newspaper. So I had a really good idea of what that should look like. And, I got to Cortland, like none of that was in place. And the nurses were, I don't want to say hostile, but they weren't, they
voiced their opinions.
Yes, emergency department nurses are not afraid to voice their opinions and not afraid to tell you to get lost. But I have a, terribly positive attitude. So I'll be back tomorrow with stickers or with food or with something. We had, Guthrie had taken Cortland over. They were failing, as a hospital. They were probably going to close their doors and Guthrie came in and it wasn't kind of seen. They really wanted to maintain their independence as a rural, hospital. They're the only hospital in the county. So they were just kind of like, who is this? What are you doing here? You're from corporate. You're from Guthrie. We're not Guthrie yet. So I was kind of expecting that. I got warned, they're not happy. They don't really have a manager at this point and they feel kind of forgotten. So I drove up to Cortland. It's about an hour and 20 minutes. I was there every day at 7. They didn't have huddles. when I got there. So that was, step one was getting them to huddle in the morning, which was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. It was terrible. But honestly, yeah, bribery works. I would get nurse stickers. I would get food. I would do whatever I had to do. I would do drawings. Like if they actually came to the desk at huddle, they'd be recognized like something. So persistence is key, really. They just honestly they got tired of fighting with me.
You were building all these relationships, meanwhile putting some processes in places that they needed, that they lacked.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, you can say I'm doing the huddle, but that doesn't mean everybody's coming, right? So it's not just putting the process in, like you were doing things to make sure it was successful.
Yeah, eventually we got there. And when we did have a candidate for the manager, she wasn't a nurse, but she had a ton of great operational experience at Guthrie. And I had worked with her on a project in the past, and I knew she's really great. She's a very effective, incredible leader, and ended up being just such a great mentor to me. But after, I had sort of gone through the ringer with them, and they understood I was there to help them. And when I escalated things, or when they needed a computer fix, there was actually going to be someone there to put a ticket in and follow up with IT to make sure something got fixed. Then they saw me as a resource, and they trusted me and became comfortable with me. It really was just about just showing up, doing what I said I was going to do, escalating things when they could be, and just following up. And then because they trusted me, I was able to speak to the incoming manager and say no, I promise she's really great. She's going to do really great things for you guys. And I think that made her transition a lot easier. And then I kind of stayed on as her co-manager for the next 6-8 months, however. And we still are close. I love seeing the nurses from Cortland now. They love seeing me. It's nice.
That's awesome. That's a good story. And what a great way to literally kind of get your feet wet, for sure. Kind of taking over something that's kind of been pushed aside or they were in trouble, bringing them into the fold. That's great. Great experience. Good story.
Yeah, it was really great. And, they still, come to me if they can't find a product in Oracle, or if something's broken, they know that they can still always call me, and I'll point them to the right person.
Yeah, the basis of these relationships is that you established yourself as a resource and somebody that they could trust to help them get things done or make improvements, right? What are some of the other processes? Like you talked about the huddle, you threw out some good ones, and really, you're really building that foundation. That's why we kind of talked about rebuilding the supply chain through relationships, right? So, again, you can put those processes in place, but you can't do it all on your own, right? You need to get engagement. You need to have involvement for it to be successful. What are some other processes that you put into place to just kind of leverage those relationships and get sort of organizational buy-in as you were trying to change the culture and improve the supply chain?
Aside from the huddles, that was definitely the big one. It would be probably just the performance boards. I mean, having them be invested in their metrics, and the door-to-door, door-to-floor times. It's really hard in the emergency department because you never know when you might get 100 patients in a day out of nowhere, when yesterday you had 70. So that can be difficult, but really door-to-door was kind of a big one. It was okay, let's see how we're doing there. And then we would keep tracking, and I would look through the week and see where we were. And, when we finally got into the green where we had lower than, an hour door to door, everybody would get a treat. So definitely performance boards were good.
I love your reward
really
system.
You
really built in a lot of
bubble
rewards.
gum or something. What kind of treats are we talking about here?
Oh, I think we did pizza. We'd always get pizza lunch is good, but
this is old psychology.
Donuts,
this
coffee,
This is ring a bell for Hayes, Pavlov's dog. He starts salivating. It's all day long. I like it. Old psychology here.
The main purpose of the whole year, or at least one of my major projects, was to get vertical care, integrated. So it would be triage. And if you were a walkie-talkie, if you were standing, you would go to vertical care for rapid treatment, rapid triage, get them in, get them seen, get them out. And that way we could free up the bed. So we had to find the space in the emergency department where those patients could go, really advocate for staffing to staff that area if we were really going to make it work. set up the TVs in the room so people could watch TV if they were going to go to the vertical care waiting room. We did have one day of that while I was there. That was like, finally we got it up and running, but it was really tough. It was a really tough time. We just could not get the staffing. We couldn't get the staffing, couldn't get enough people to make it work.
Well, Lea, let me jump in. I would guess that when you got into the supply chain role with this background, all that experiences were really probably vital for you to kind of connect the dots internally with all the hospitals, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It was great seeing, because in the emergency department, you get to see a little bit of everything. You get to see them go up to the floors and how that works, or go to discharge, or, and the ED has a little bit of everything in terms of products too. So I got to know a lot that way. And even tidbits from, working in the emergency department, the lab specimen caps. All of a sudden, we have a really strict system for what color cap goes with what kind of test and what can and can't go into the tube systems. And there was a shortage of one of the colors of caps, and it was never communicated to anybody. It never made its way down to the emergency department. So people were ordering their yellow caps, but purple was coming in and nobody knew why or what was going on. And it was sort of like, oh, I think I heard from somebody that there's a shortage of these caps, and now we kind of have to change our workflows. And I remember being like, how has no one communicated that? Like, how does that happen? Who even orders this stuff? I'd only done ordering like through the storeroom. I knew I called the storeroom and they brought stuff up, but that was like the only knowledge I had of supply chain at Guthrie was the storerooms, really.
This magical place.
Exactly. That just shows up. Yep, exactly.
It's great when it works that way, but sometimes you call and it doesn't show up.
Right? I know. Yep.
Leo, outside of the ED specifically, were there other influential individuals that you ran into that were like, you got the full story, like in the hallway? I mean, I think one of the things, the pandemic that we're still living in is just getting out of your office to go see people, the whole 10 and 5, 10 feet, you acknowledge 5, how you doing, Hayes, what's going on, what's happening in your world today, and all of a sudden they stop you. Did you ever run into those individuals that you learned so much information outside of the ED that were applicable, key individuals?
The nurse educators and the house nurses were, my best friends, and you always know what's going on. They would give you the scoop on the patients or what's holding them up. The nurse educators were great. I was in the emergency department. We were going through the IV pump conversion, and the ED at Cortland, they always said they were, the redheaded stepchild. People forgot about them or, didn't really pay attention to them. So getting the scoop, hey, I've heard that we're getting these new pumps. Some guy came up and asked if he wanted to demo them, but I didn't really know what was going on. And I think the nurse educators are great. They hear things from the system level, and it kind of all comes down to them and getting to actually set up real demos or, get the information from them. That was really helpful.
Yeah, just even the flows. I remember like working with the EMS teams and really learning they used and came in, man. Their input when they would come in, you're like, oh my gosh, because they need, what are you donating? What are they billing out? How does that process work? Your pumps, you talked about pumps. How many times they make it on an EMS and you wonder where it's gone and when it came back and you don't have your inventory. So I think EMS was a big part of that too. You kind of shaking your head yes too. Is that right?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, EMS knows what's up. It's really great to have relationships with them because they'll, give you the heads up, what's coming in, if we need to. If we've got the space, if we don't, if they're going to wait less, if they go up to Rochester or somewhere else, if they have my pumps, if they have my wheelchair.
Yeah.
For sure.
For sure.
What about, and this is kind of my final question, but where did you get strategy from? Did it come down from leadership? Because you really didn't have somebody in your position, right? Like when you came into it. So you're kind of like rebuilding this supply chain. You're new to the industry in so many ways, even though you had this transferable skill set, over internships and fellowships and your work at Ann Taylor. So like all of that prepared you, but did the strategic direction come from the leaders in the organization, or did you have to go out and sort of connect with colleagues in the industry to figure out like, how am I going to build the foundation? What's missing that's like critical? How did that all come together for you?
I had a lot of internal help. I had a lot of external help, but essentially the VP of talent, she said, we have supply chain. They're kind of without a leader. They're a team that's been kind of broken. There's been a lot of turnover. Lea has a little bit of experience in some small areas of supply chain. Try it out. And the VP of supply chain, she just gave me a shot. She said, I think your experience, your relationships, the people throughout the organization, and some transferable skills that you have, I think you can do it. I really think you can. So she absolutely, taught me everything I know. I did so much one-on-one time with her when I first got into the position. And, within my first month of having the job she sent me to, all within like a couple months, I got to go to the RM conference, the Vizient conference, the IDN summits. So she really was like, you've got to get out there like now. And these are going to be your crash courses, your introductions to healthcare supply chain, contracting, sourcing strategies. And I definitely went to town there. Yeah.
So you quickly immersed yourself in the industry conversations that were relevant at these conferences and trade shows, and you probably met with suppliers that you didn't know existed. So you're able to broaden, kind of your base of, hey, if a new challenge shows up, maybe I'm learning a little bit about what's out there, who we can partner with to help us solve these problems. But, so I am going to ask one more question on this do you remember one particular presentation that you sat in on early on that really kind of stood out and motivated you? Or maybe it's a speaker that was just this was a light bulb moment for me, because I think there's a lot of people out there that are not sending their supply chain talent to conferences. In some cases, you see a lot of leadership going, but, they're already got their pulse on a lot of these conversations, and if we're going to be growing talent within our organizations, we got to make sure, that somebody that's really got the aptitude is getting out and getting exposed, right? So what was maybe your favorite presentation or speaker that really made it all make sense and motivate you?
Actually, I do remember it was about stop putting out fires in supply chain. And it was how to kind of get to that proactive place and clean things up so that they're cleaned up and you don't have to keep doing things the wrong way just because it's what you've always done or because you're too stressed or busy to really figure it out and do it the right way or improve the process. His name's Josh Bakalar. He's from OU Health, and he gave the presentation. Shout out to him. I actually saw him then the next year it might have been at the Vizient conference, and I went up to him and I was like, listen, I think you gave a really great presentation. It really helped me in those first days. And, now I see him at every conference, and I think hopefully he remembers me. I think he probably does. Shout out to him. But,
he's probably like, man, that's
good.
She's Becker's.
Right.
No, and he was so helpful. I went and I sat next to him at, the keynote session at the Vizient Summit. I saw him. I said, oh my gosh, that's that guy who gave such a great presentation. It really helped me. And we ended up, we chatted before and after, and he gave me great advice and, told me to reach out if I ever had questions or wanted to brainstorm anything with him, if I was having challenges. So relationships are everything to me. Honestly, again, I'm not shy. I don't scare easy. I don't have a problem going up to someone or endearing myself to someone or being vulnerable and asking for help. And that was a huge deal. Even, when I didn't know things when I first started in supply chain or when there were, fires happening, I think I knew the right people. I knew the right people to ask for help from, and they already knew me or, had already worked with me in the past or were related to me somehow through it being such a small town. But I don't know if I could have done it if it wasn't, Guthrie or somewhere that I had already had such a strong foundation or honestly cared so much about the people and about the patients in the community. But it really made me figure it out fast.
Excellent, Lea. Well, great interview, great story. Congratulations on being recognized by Becker's once again. Hey, it's very astute of you to point that out at the beginning. And, I couldn't agree more. It really, you've outlined where relationships were important to you in several different ways, right? And from getting your initiatives off the ground and how you nurture those relationships to how you were able to, find individuals that could mentor you or fill in gaps and then establishing those and those relationships to really help further you forward. So thank you so much for coming on the Power Supply podcast. Anything you want to add before we wrap?
Invest in your communities. We love rural healthcare. And, it's not always better in the big cities. I think where you come from can be a really great place.
Great point.
Amen to that. And Gary, you know all about that because you definitely don't live in a big community.
That was Lea Scopelliti, Director of Strategic Sourcing and Corporate Purchasing at the Guthrie Clinic. And great conversation today just about how you find your path into supply chain. Take some experiences with you that can help you be successful. And then most importantly, what can you focus on first when maybe you just don't have that experience base and you're just building out your knowledge base? That's focus on the relationships. Listen to where they're having issues and figure out how you can engage them, because just by partnering with them, you'll be able to make a difference in your organization. And like Lea said, she's been to the big city, but she came back home because she really has that sense of service to her community.
That you're exactly right. Cause she mentioned, she's got family there. She's been there like all of her life, but goes away, comes back, and she used those relationships, not only with her family, but everybody else. And she created basically a sharing environment so that she could always go to somebody and ask for help. And she's done a wonderful job. Obviously we mentioned that she'd been recognized, but I learned a lot just from the standpoint of, you know what? You can never have too many relationships, and you have to be able to generate those. And she definitely did that well.
All right, everybody, that's going to do it for this week. And on behalf of Hayes and Gary, thanks for listening to this week's episode of Power Supply.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Power Supply. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on your iPhone or Android. Simply search for Power Supply in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@powersupplymedia.net. We look forward to hearing from you.